They saw the end. But what they couldn't see, what Sterling Vance certainly couldn't comprehend, was the quiet hum of certainty within me. The silence in the boardroom was thick, heavy, suffocating. It pressed down on everyone, a palpable weight of impending failure. Yet, I sat there, observing, my expression placid, almost detached. Across the polished mahogany table, Sterling Vance, our COO, leaned forward, his face a mask of frustration, his voice barely controlled. "Look, Elara," he began, his tone dripping with the condescending pity I had grown accustomed to. "I appreciate your enthusiasm. But we've exhausted every practical avenue. Our top engineers, people with real-world experience, have been working around the clock. Your semiotic approach, while novel, simply isn't applicable here. This is a system collapse, not a philosophical debate." He paused, sweeping his gaze around the room, seeking validation from the anxious board members who nodded in weary agreement. "We've lost billions. The AI network is dead. Aether Solutions is finished." His declaration hung in the air, a death knell. He looked at me again, a triumphant, almost cruel glint in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Elara. But even a PhD in Theoretical Semiotics can't fix a neural network when it's gone dark. It's time to accept reality." A faint, almost imperceptible murmur went through the room. Some glances were directed my way, a mixture of pity and exasperation. They saw a young woman, quietly persistent, but ultimately out of her depth, clutching onto a degree they deemed useless. They saw the end. But what they couldn't see, what Sterling Vance certainly couldn't comprehend, was the quiet hum of certainty within me. I detected the subtle tremor in Vance's voice, the slight widening of his pupils when he spoke of finished. He believed his own words, but fear was a shadow clinging to him. I simply met his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching my lips. "With all due respect, Sterling," I replied, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the defeatism like a surgeon's scalpel. "I believe we're looking at the wrong map. And I might just have the coordinates to the right one." The quiet confidence in my voice, so incongruous with the gravity of the situation, caused a few eyebrows to raise, but Vance merely scoffed, dismissing it as the last gasp of delusion. He had no idea he was standing at the edge of his own precipice, and I held the key to pushing him over. To understand that moment, that quiet defiance in the face of absolute despair, you need to understand the journey that led me there. My path was never conventional. While my peers at university were diving into computer science or engineering, I found myself captivated by the intricate dance of meaning, the hidden languages of communication, the architecture of symbols. I pursued my PhD in Theoretical Semiotics, a field many considered abstract, academic, and utterly impractical. What are you going to do with that, Elara? Analyze the semiotics of corporate memos? My family would joke, though the underlying concern was always present. When I joined Aether Solutions as a junior research analyst, it was a leap of faith. The company was at the forefront of AI development, designing neural networks that promised to revolutionize data processing. My role was ostensibly to help interpret user feedback and analyze communication patterns, but I saw it as a grand experiment in applying semiotics to a living, evolving system. From day one, however, I sensed the institutional skepticism. My degree was a curiosity, often a punchline. Sterling Vance, our COO, embodied this dismissiveness. A man carved from the traditional mold of engineering excellence, he saw everything through the lens of rigid logic and quantifiable results. He was fond of saying, "Elara, around here we build things that work, not theories that sound deep." His comments, always delivered with a sneering smile, were constant. They were designed to belittle, to remind me of my perceived irrelevance. He would often ask, just loud enough for others to hear, "So, Elara, any new philosophical insights on Q4 earnings? Or perhaps your language of AI can tell us why the server rack is overheating?" I never reacted outwardly. I simply observed. I saw the patterns in his behavior, the subtle tells of his insecurity beneath the bravado, and I saw the patterns in the AI network itself. While others focused on code architecture, hardware diagnostics, and algorithmic efficiency, I began to see the network not just as a collection of circuits and data packets, but as a complex, self-organizing language system. Every data point, every connection, every computational process was a form of communication, a symbol in a vast, evolving lexicon. This was my secret weapon, a way of seeing the invisible, understanding the unspoken. I spent countless hours mapping these conversational flows within the network, treating data anomalies not as mere bugs, but as grammatical errors, syntactical misalignments, or logical paradoxes within the AI's own internal dialogue. The company's flagship product, the AetherNet, was a marvel of our collective engineering prowess. It was designed to predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy, constantly learning and self-optimizing. But then it began to stutter. Minor glitches escalated into erratic behavior, then into full-blown system-wide crashes. The engineering teams, led by Vance's most trusted lieutenants, were baffled. They ran diagnostics, checked for rogue code, scanned for external attacks, recalibrated sensors, everything by the book. But the problem persisted, deepening with each attempt to fix it, like a cancerous growth no one could properly identify. This was not a hardware failure, nor a simple coding error. It was something far more insidious, a fundamental breakdown in the very meaning of the AI's operations. As the crisis mounted, the pressure intensified. Millions, then billions in projected losses. Clients were abandoning us. Investors were pulling out. Aether Solutions, once hailed as an industry pioneer, was on the brink of collapse. I knew with a quiet certainty that the answer lay not in traditional diagnostics but in understanding the network's internal semiotics. I saw the problem not as a broken machine but as a mind speaking in gibberish. While the engineering teams were locked in their war room, analyzing endless lines of code and hardware schematics, I was in my quiet corner, charting hidden semantic drifts, identifying linguistic dissonances in the data streams that no conventional algorithm would flag as an error. I worked in secret, fueled by an almost obsessive drive. I meticulously documented the emerging anomalous grammar within the Ethernet's data communication. It was like deciphering a dying language. I wasn't fixing individual lines of code. I was attempting to rebuild the fundamental rules of the AI's internal dialogue. Using my insights, I began to develop a heuristic algorithm, not a patch, but a self-correcting semantic framework. It was designed to identify and realign misinterpretations within the network's own information processing, essentially teaching the AI to speak clearly again. This was my plan, my counter-strategy. It was audacious, unconventional, and inherently risky, but I knew deep in my core that it was the only way. I had to prove that some problems couldn't be fixed by sheer processing power, but by understanding the subtle dance of meaning. As the company spiraled further into chaos, Vance's dismissiveness towards me only intensified. He saw my quiet focus, my lack of direct involvement in the official troubleshooting efforts, as a tacit admission of my field's irrelevance. Still contemplating the deeper meaning of our impending bankruptcy, Elara, he'd quip, his voice laced with venom. He was too consumed by his own failing efforts, too convinced of the superiority of traditional methods, to even consider that a solution could emerge from a domain he so openly scorned. My silence, born of intense concentration, was interpreted as a sign of intellectual impotence, further inflating his already considerable ego. He believed he had won the ideological battle, proving once and for all that hard science trumped soft theory. Meanwhile, the engineering teams, under Vance's increasingly frantic direction, were sinking deeper into the mire. They tried everything, complete system reboots, isolating modules, even attempting to roll back to earlier, stable versions of the AI. Each attempt was met with failure, often exacerbating the problem. The AetherNet, once our pride, was now a digital corpse, emitting nothing but garbled, meaningless data. The financial projections were catastrophic. News reports painted Aether Solutions as a cautionary tale of overreach and technological hubris. The atmosphere in the office was one of grim resignation. People spoke in hushed tones, clearing out their desks, anticipating the inevitable layoffs. But while the ship was sinking, I was quietly charting a new course. I was running simulations of my heuristic algorithm, feeding it historical data from the healthy network, then introducing the corrupted, semiotic patterns I had identified. The results were electrifying. My algorithm, which I called Hermes after the Greek god of communication, consistently re-established coherent data flows, correcting the internal, linguistic, errors with remarkable precision. I refined Hermes tirelessly, sacrificing sleep, subsisting on coffee, and the quiet thrill of discovery. I knew I wouldn't get a formal opportunity to present my findings. Vance would shut me down before I could even open my mouth. The company was too steeped in crisis and too committed to conventional thinking to entertain a philosophical solution. So I prepared a different kind of reveal. I didn't just have a theory. I had a working solution, battle-tested in a simulated environment replicating the exact conditions of the Ethernet's collapse. The quietude was not weakness, it was the calm before the storm. I was ready to bring the fire, not just talk about it. The climax arrived in the form of a hastily convened all-hands emergency meeting. The investors, key clients, and the entire board were present, their faces etched with despair. Sterling Vance stood at the podium, his usual bluster replaced by a hollow defeat. He was presenting the grim reality: Aether Solutions would initiate bankruptcy proceedings by the end of the week. He droned on about unforeseen complexities, unprecedented failures, the limitations of current technology. He spoke of layoffs, of the company's legacy ending in ruin. It was a eulogy, not a solution. As he finished, the room was silent once more, a palpable sense of grief hanging in the air. That was my cue. I rose from my seat at the back, my movements deliberate, attracting every eye in the room. Vance, startled, glared at me. "Elara, this isn't the time for questions," he said, his voice laced with thinly veiled contempt. "No, Sterling, it's not a question," I stated, my voice projecting clearly, calmly, across the room. "It's an answer. And a demonstration." Before he could object further, I walked purposefully to the main display panel, bypassing his attempts to intervene. With a few swift motions, I connected my secure, isolated terminal to the main network's diagnostic port, a port that remained active, if only for monitoring the system's irreversible decline. A collective gasp rippled through the room. On the massive screen, lines of code, data streams, and error messages, which had been static and unresponsive for weeks, flickered to life. "For weeks," I began, my voice steady, "you've been looking for a bug in the code, a flaw in the hardware. You've been trying to fix a machine. But the AetherNet isn't just a machine, it's a language. And its language broke down." I brought up a visual representation of chaotic, meaningless data patterns, the gibberish I had identified. "This," I explained, pointing to the jumbled mess, "is what your engineers saw. Semantic noise. An unsolvable puzzle using traditional methods." Then with a single command, I initiated the Hermes algorithm. The screen transformed. Gradually, miraculously, the chaotic patterns began to resolve. Lines of data that had been fragmented and nonsensical started to reconnect, forming coherent pathways. The squiggly lines of static resolved into smooth, flowing currents of information. It was like watching a scrambled television signal slowly, perfectly, tune itself. The process was mesmerizing, almost artistic. "My PhD is in Theoretical Semiotics," I continued, addressing the silent, stunned faces in the room. It allowed me to see that the AI's internal language had developed a self-referential paradox, a linguistic error in its own communication protocols. It wasn't about faulty wiring, it was about the AI misunderstanding itself. As I spoke, the Ethernet's activity indicators, which had been flatlined for weeks, began to pull screen. First one, then another, then a cascade. The system was coming back online, module by module. Hermes, I explained, is a heuristic algorithm designed to identify and correct these semantic misalignments. It's not a patch, it's a re-education. It teaches the AI to speak clearly again to itself and to the world. The room erupted. Whispers turned into excited shouts. Board members sprang from their seats, rushing to the screen, verifying the impossible. Vance, meanwhile, stood frozen, his face a horrifying canvas of disbelief, anger, and utter humiliation. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He looked less like a COO and more like a deflated balloon. The triumphant glint in his eye from just minutes ago had been replaced by the wide, staring panic of a man who had just seen his entire worldview crumble. The AetherNet was not just recovering, it was doing so gracefully, efficiently, better than before. My useless degree had just breathed life back into a multi-billion-dollar company. The immediate fallout was swift and decisive. The boardroom, which had moments before been a tomb of despair, transformed into a whirlwind of exhilaration and frantic activity. The investors, who had been on the verge of pulling their last investments, were now clamoring for details, their faces shining with newfound hope. Clients, who had already drafted termination notices, were suddenly calling, eager to re-engage. The air was thick with apologies, praise, and a profound collective sense of relief. But for Sterling Vance, the consequences were brutal. He stood there, a pariah in his own domain, as the system he had declared dead roared back to life thanks to the very person he had consistently mocked. His face, once proud and authoritative, was now contorted in a mixture of rage and utter humiliation. He tried to interject, to claim some remote oversight, but his words were drowned out by the roar of renewed confidence in the room. He was a general whose army had been saved by a strategist he had personally dismissed and ridiculed. Within hours, the board, in an emergency meeting I was not present for, moved to replace him. His narrow-mindedness, his inability to consider unconventional solutions, and his public disdain for innovative thinking had not only pushed the company to the brink but had also led to his spectacular downfall. He was escorted out of the building by security, his arrogance now a brittle, shattered thing. The engineers who had shared Vance's skepticism approached me with a mixture of awe and profound regret. They had watched me work, but their ingrained beliefs had prevented them from seeing the value in my approach. They apologized not just for their dismissal, but for their own intellectual blind spots. They were eager to learn, to understand the semiotic principles I had applied. This was not a moment of gloating for me, but of quiet vindication. I simply explained my process, shared my data, and began to collaborate with them on integrating Hermes more deeply into the AetherNet's core architecture. In the weeks and months that followed, Aether Solutions didn't just recover, it soared. The AetherNet, now fortified by the Hermes algorithm, became more robust, more resilient, and remarkably more adaptable than ever before. Its ability to self-correct and interpret complex data patterns improved dramatically, leading to unprecedented insights and a rapid reclaiming of market dominance. The company, once teetering on bankruptcy, was now thriving, a testament to the power of unconventional thinking. My role within Aether Solutions shifted dramatically. I was promoted to Director of Cognitive Systems, a newly created department dedicated to integrating diverse, interdisciplinary approaches into our AI development. My useless degree was now seen as our competitive edge. I was given the resources and the autonomy to explore the deeper semiotics of AI, to push the boundaries of what was considered possible. My quiet office, once a place of solitary research, became a hub of innovation, attracting brilliant minds from various fields. Linguists, philosophers, artists, all collaborating to build more intuitive, more understanding AI. I found my peace not through grand gestures or public accolades, but in the quiet satisfaction of seeing my vision realized, of proving that true innovation often comes from the fringes, not the center. Looking back, the entire experience served as a powerful reminder of a fundamental truth. Brilliance often hides in plain sight, dismissed by those too tethered to conventional wisdom. The world, particularly the professional world, often rewards adherence to established paths, validating only what is already understood. But some of the most profound breakthroughs, the most elegant solutions, emerge from the courage to look beyond the obvious, to trust the insights that others deem impractical or irrelevant. Never allow the narrow perceptions of others to define your worth or limit your potential. Believe in the unique value of your perspective, cultivate your unconventional strengths, and when the moment arrives, be ready to quietly, confidently, and unequivocally prove them wrong. The greatest triumphs are often achieved not by shouting the loudest, but by demonstrating with quiet conviction what others could not even conceive.